Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually we kick things off with a bit more energy, right? We'll find a hook, a surprising fact, maybe connected to the news cycle just to, get things moving.
Set the blood flowing.
Exactly. But today feels different. We're going to have to approach this one differently. I'm looking at the material we have laid out here. Internal analyses, notes on power dynamics, legal frameworks, and the picture it paints is, well, it's stark.
It is.
And it requires a different pace. We need to be deliberate. We need to slow down.
Today we are presenting our own analysis of a Russia that many people in the West still do not see.
That is the perfect starting point. Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, and as always, I'm joined by our expert guide through these complex topics. And you're right to set that tone right away. This isn't about the daily headlines.
Yeah.
We aren't here to talk about the latest troop movements on a map or the fluctuating price of oil or some political gaffe that happened this week. We are trying to do something much deeper. We're conducting a structural analysis of power.
That's the mission. And I think it's important to be really clear about this right from the start. This isn't a standard compilation of sources. We're not just reading you opinion pieces or emotional reactions from the news.
Right.
This is an internal analysis. It's based on observable patterns, on repeated behaviors, and on consistent outcomes over time. Our goal here is pattern recognition, not rhetoric.
We're looking at the mechanics of the machine, not just the noise it's making.
Exactly.
And I think it's important that we frame this for you, for our listener. Maybe you're someone who follows global politics very closely. Or maybe, and this is a really important group for us to talk to today, maybe you're someone who's skeptical of the mainstream Western narrative.
And that's a valid position to hold.
It is. We know that for a lot of people, the constant criticism of Russia that you hear in the media can feel, well, it can feel emotional. It can feel like prejudice, or like it's coming from a place of not really understanding the culture.
The feeling that the West just doesn't get Russia, that we're projecting our own values onto a place that just operates differently.
Right. And look, prejudice is real. It does blind us. If you go into an analysis with hate in your heart, you're not going to see the truth. But today, we're asking you to look past the labels.
Past the East versus West framing.
Yes. We're going to look at the system itself. The core thesis of the material we're analyzing today is it's provocative, but it is very specific. It argues that Russia is not functioning as a normal nation state,
but rather as a mafia-style power system.
That is a heavy term. Mafia-style. It conjures up all these images from movies, gangsters in suits and back rooms.
Right.
But we're talking about a nuclear superpower, a permanent member of the UN Security Council. So before we even start to unpack that, let's just do a quick tone check. The source material we're using today it's cold. It's precise.
There's no melodrama in it. And, crucially, there are no euphemisms. That is absolutely critical. Throughout this conversation, we're going to be using direct language. When the source describes an invasion, we're going to call it invasion. When it describes repression, we'll call it repression. We aren't going to hedge. We aren't going to soften the edges to be polite or diplomatic.
We're just looking at the raw data of how this state operates.
That's it.
Okay. So let's start there. If we're going to make the case that this is a mafia state and not a normal state, we have to begin with the things that, make a state. The basics.
The architecture.
The architecture, right. A constitution, courts, elections, a parliament. Russia has all of those things. I can go online right now and pull up the Russian constitution. It has articles, it lists rights. It looks, for all the world, like a modern European legal framework.
You can, and you're right, it does look that way. And this is really where the illusion begins. This is part one of our deep dive, the illusion of statehood.
Okay.
The source material we're working from makes this fascinating and honestly a somewhat terrifying distinction between what it calls declarative rights and enforceable rights.
Declarative versus enforceable. Okay, that sounds like legalese, but I have a feeling it's much more visceral than that. Break that down for us.
It is. It's fundamental to understanding everything else. A declarative right is something that's written down on paper. It declares you have freedom of speech or you have the right to a fair trial.
It exists on paper.
It exists on paper. The analysis uses this metaphor. It's like a painting of a window on a solid brick wall. It looks like a window. It even catches the light like a window. But if you try to open it to get some fresh air,
you smash your hand against the brick.
You smash your hand against the brick. The analysis argues that the Russian Constitution is, in essence, a decorative object. It mimics the look and feel of a modern state, but it lacks the actual mechanism to function as one.
So let's walk through a scenario just to make this concrete. I'm a Russian citizen. I decide I want to exercise Article 31 of the Constitution. which guarantees the right to peaceful assembly.
Okay.
So I go out to a square with a sign. The Constitution, the piece of paper, says, I am allowed to be there.
Correct. The paper says you are safe. But the reality is the system. When the police approach you, that piece of paper doesn't stop them. In a system with enforceable rights, the police are bound by that document.
Right. If they arrest me illegally, a judge is supposed to step in, release me, and maybe even punish the police.
That's the theory. But in the Russian system, that declarative right, that painting of a window, it evaporates the moment it conflicts with the will of the state.
There's a really chilling detail in our notes here about that specific moment. The moment a citizen is detained, it describes this transition that happens. It's not just a legal change. It's described as something deeper, an ontological one, a change in your very being.
It is a profound shift. The analysis suggests that the moment a person is placed in handcuffs in Russia, a fundamental transformation occurs. In a functional rule of law state, a person in handcuffs is still a citizen.
Still a rights-bearing individual.
Exactly. You have rights, you get a lawyer, you are presumed innocent. The system is designed, at least in theory, to protect your rights during that process.
But in this system,
the source argues, that person loses their status as a rights-bearing citizen entirely.
so what do they become, if not a citizen?
They become effectively the property of the system.
Property of the system. That implies a total loss of agency. You aren't a person with rights anymore. You're just an object being moved through a pipeline.
It implies that the law is no longer a shield that's there to protect you. It has become a weapon that is being used against you. And this takes us directly to the next pillar, the judicial system.
Because if you're just property, you don't really get a trial. You get a process.
A predetermined route. And the numbers, the sheer statistics, they back this up completely. I know you were looking at them earlier.
I was, and they're just staggering. We are looking at conviction rates in Russian courts that they just seem statistically impossible for any kind of fair system.
They're near 100%.
Near 100%. I mean, even in the most efficient, most rigorous legal systems in the world, mistakes happen. Evidence turns out to be weak. Juries are unconvinced. There's always some percentage of acquittals.
Of course. In most Western democracies, acquittal rates can vary wildly, but there is always a meaningful statistical possibility of being found not guilty. In Russia, the acquittal rate is statistically irrelevant.
It's a rounding error.
It's practically zero. It's a rounding error, which tells you something profound about what's happening.
So if the outcome is already decided before anyone even walks into the courtroom, what is the point of the trial? What are the judges and the lawyers and the witnesses actually doing in there for days or weeks or sometimes months?
The analysis describes it as procedural theater.
Theater.
Yes. If the conviction is guaranteed before the judge even puts on their robes, then the trial isn't about discovering the truth. It's certainly not about delivering justice. It is about confirming a decision that was made somewhere else entirely.
So the courts aren't arbiters of truth.
They are instruments of executive power. They are the rubber stamp that makes the repression look legal. The judge is an actor reading from a script that was written for them.
It's performative. It's a simulation of justice. And that theme of simulation seems to be a core pattern here, because it carries right over to the next pillar of the state, elections.
Exactly. Because again, on paper, they have elections. People go to polling stations, they cast ballots, there are campaign posters up.
It has all the trappings of a democracy.
All of them. But if we look at elections through a Western lens, we think of public choice. We think of genuine campaigns, debates, the actual uncertainty of the outcome. We ask, who is going to win? Will it be candidate A or candidate B?
But the source argues that in Russia, elections are just paperwork.
They're an administrative procedure. There's a key phrase from the source that I think is worth repeating here. Elections exist on paper. Power does not change hands.
Power does not change hands.
It's a critical pattern to recognize. In a mafia-style system, you cannot have uncertainty. Uncertainty is a threat to the family, to the boss, to the system. It implies weakness. It implies a loss of control. So the outcome has to be predetermined.
So what is the participation for? Why have people go to the polls at all?
Participation, people casting ballots, it does not equal representation. It is a ritual of loyalty.
A ritual like a public holiday or a military parade?
Precisely. It's a way for the system to demonstrate that it controls the population, not that the population controls the system. It validates the bureaucracy's efficiency, not the will of the voter.
So we have a constitution that's essentially decoration, courts that are just theater, and elections that are a simulation. If these formal institutions aren't actually running the country, what is? And this brings us right to part two, the mafia state structure itself.
And that's the central question. If the law doesn't rule, what does? And the answer, according to our analysis, is loyalty.
Loyalty, not to an idea like the country or to a document like the Constitution, but loyalty to a person, to the boss.
In mafia systems, obedience replaces legality. I want to say that again because it is absolutely central to everything we are discussing today. In mafia systems, obedience replaces legality.
Okay, let's look at how that actually works on the ground, because loyalty can be an abstract concept. How does it function mechanically in the structure of the state? The source contrasts the Russian structure with, say, a standard European state.
Right. In Germany or France or here in the U.S., a local mayor is elected. They are accountable to the people in their town who voted for them.
And if they do a bad job, if they don't fix the potholes, if the schools are failing, if crime goes up, the voters can fire them in the next election.
Correct. The accountability flows downward to the people. In the Russian system, that power dynamic is completely inverted. Regional governors, local leaders, they are, for the most part, appointed or approved by the center, by Moscow.
So if I'm a governor in some Russian region, I'm not really looking at my voters to see if my job is safe. I'm looking up.
You're looking up at the Kremlin. Exactly. Your political and even personal survival depends on the person above you in the hierarchy, not on the people below you.
Which just eliminates local accountability entirely.
It creates a perfect vertical of power where the only metric that matters is your perceived loyalty to the boss. You can fail your people, you can let the local infrastructure completely crumble, as long as you please your patron in Moscow.
But there's a flip side to this loyalty, isn't there? It's not just about keeping your job. The notes bring up this concept of informal permission. And this is a fascinating psychological part of the system. It's not just about following orders. It's about what you are now allowed to do because you are loyal.
This is the psychology of permission. It's incredibly important. Loyalty grants protection. If you are loyal to the leader, you are granted a kind of immunity.
Immunity from what?
From the law, from consequences. You can be corrupt, you can be incompetent, you can abuse your power in your own little domain as long as you remain loyal to the top. It's a deeply transactional relationship. You support me, and in return, I let you do what you want in your fiefdom.
But that permission, that protection, it sounds fragile.
It is extremely fragile because the moment your loyalty is questioned, the moment you're seen as a threat or a liability.
The protection just evaporates.
Instantly. And this is where the stakes become incredibly high. In a normal political system, if you lose an election or you get fired from a cabinet position, you go home, you write a memoir, you become a consultant, you go on the speaking circuit. It's a professional setback.
But in this system, political defeat is existential.
It's existential. It doesn't just mean your career is over. It means your safety, your freedom, perhaps even your life is now at risk. When you lose power in a mafia state, you lose the protection of that state. You become vulnerable to the very predatory system that you helped build.
You become property again.
You become property again. And that creates a terrifying dynamic. It means that the people inside the system aren't just fighting to keep their jobs. They are fighting for their very survival. There is no graceful exit. There's no retirement plan.
Which explains the absolute ferocity of the loyalty we see. It explains why people stick with the leader even when the decisions seem irrational or self-destructive.
They're trapped. It's a structure built on fear and absolute subservience, but it's all disguised as a normal government. The analysis uses the analogy of a submarine. Once you are deep underwater in that metal tube, you can't just decide to open the hatch and leave because you disagree with the captain. You are sealed in.
This moves us into part 3, and I think this is one of the most critical parts of this entire analysis. It's about how this system manages to warp our very perception of reality. We have to talk about language as a weapon.
Yes. This is a mandatory segment for understanding how the modern Russian state operates. We often think of propaganda as just telling lies. You know, the state says, the sky is green or we didn't do it. But the source argues it goes much, much deeper than that.
This isn't just misinformation.
No. The regime systematically replaces reality with language. The term the analysis uses is moral engineering.
And we see this so clearly with the specific terms they enforce. The most obvious one, of course, is the absolute refusal to use the word war. It's a special military operation.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, people were being fined or even arrested just for using the word war.
Special military operation replaces war. Liberation replaces destruction. Security replaces repression. These are not just synonyms. They are words chosen specifically to do something to the listener's brain.
So what is the function of that? I mean, everyone knows it's a war. The soldiers on the front line know it's a war. The families getting death notices know it's a war. What does calling it a special operation actually achieve?
It lowers moral resistance. War is a heavy, terrible word. It carries the weight of death, tragedy, historical trauma, and personal responsibility. A special military operation sounds technical. It sounds limited. It almost sounds like police work.
It implies that trained professionals are handling a specific, contained problem, and you, the average citizen, don't need to worry your head about it.
It acts as a form of moral anesthesia.
Moral anesthesia, that's a powerful phrase. It numbs you to what is actually happening. It makes the intolerable seem routine, bureaucratic.
Exactly. And we really need to emphasize this point. Language does not describe reality here. Language replaces reality. If the state tells you it is liberation, then that pile of rubble you see on television must be freedom. Otherwise, you are the one who is crazy, not the state. It forces the population to participate in the lie just to stay sane.
Let's drill down on that specific word, liberation. We hear it constantly in the context of Ukraine. We are liberating the Donbass. We are liberating Mariupol.
So you take the word, and then you contrast it with the visual reality described in the source. We've all seen the satellite images. We've seen the drone footage. Depopulated towns, entire cities that have been leveled to the ground, silence where there used to be bustling life.
It raises a very provocative and very simple question, doesn't it?
It does. The question we have to ask is, liberation from what if the result is rubble and silence? If you liberate a city by erasing it from the face of the earth, the word liberation has lost all meaning.
It's become a weapon.
It becomes a weapon to hide the crime. It creates a cognitive dissonance, a disconnect between what your eyes see and what your ears are told. You see destruction, but you hear salvation.
And this manipulation of language isn't just about the war itself. It's also about how the state defends itself against any and all criticism. This brings us to part 4, weaponized Russophobia.
This is another mandatory concept we absolutely need to clarify. The term Russophobia is thrown around constantly by Russian diplomats, by state media, by online trolls. The expert view here is that we need to stop seeing Russophobia as a social phenomenon like racism or xenophobia and start seeing it as a state-deployed defensive weapon.
So when a state official screams Russophobia, it's not actually a complaint about discrimination, it's a tactic.
It is a shield. Its function is to shut down scrutiny. It's designed to deflect accountability and to reframe documented violence as simple prejudice.
Okay, we need to be very precise here, because there are people listening right now who might genuinely worry about anti-Russian sentiment. They might see hateful videos online or hear rhetoric that sounds hostile toward Russian people. And that stuff does exist. We can't deny that.
It absolutely does exist, and prejudice is never acceptable from any side. But we must make the explicit distinction. Criticism of a state's actions, criticism of an invasion, of torture, of corruption is not hatred of a people.
Right. Saying the Russian military committed a crime in the town of Bucha is not the same as saying I hate all Russians. One is a specific claim about an event. The other is a statement of bigotry.
Exactly. But the state intentionally blurs that line. By crying Russophobia every single time someone points out a war crime, the state is attempting to hide behind its own people. They are saying, you aren't attacking our policies, you are attacking us, the Russian civilization. They use their own people as a human shield against criticism.
It's a way to avoid answering the question.
Labeling criticism as Russophobia does not answer the accusation. It avoids it. It's a rhetorical smoke bomb. If I ask you, why did your military bomb a hospital? And you respond by calling me a Russophobe, you have not answered the question about the hospital.
You've just changed the subject to my alleged prejudice.
And for you, the listener, the one who might be skeptical of Western narratives, this is so crucial to understand. The state uses this term to manipulate your own sense of fairness. They use your desire not to be prejudiced as a tool to silence your critical thinking.
They are counting on your decency to protect their indecency. They know the West values tolerance, so they weaponize that very value against us.
Precisely.
Let's pivot now to the mechanics of how this system carries out its darkest work. We've talked about the structure, the language. Now let's talk about the violence, part 5, the machinery of violence.
There is a common defense we hear, and it's important to address it. Putin didn't personally kill those people, and on a literal level, that's true. Vladimir Putin does not fly bombers. He doesn't pull the trigger in a basement in Bucha. He sits in an office.
But in a mafia-style system, responsibility is what? It's distributed?
It's fragmented. The orders are often implicit. The leader signals a desire, solve this problem, or make them respect us, or we need to deal with this traitor. The subordinates then interpret that desire and act on it.
So the responsibility is shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. The general gives a vague order, the colonel passes it down, the captain nods to the sergeant, and the soldier on the ground is the one who pulls the trigger.
So everyone is involved, but no one feels fully responsible. The soldier says, I was just following orders. The general says, I was just executing national policy. The leader at the top says, I never told them to commit crimes. It's a perfect diffusion of guilt.
A system designed to insulate the top while incriminating everyone at the bottom.
Exactly. But there is also a deeper psychological aspect here that the source really delves into, the concept it calls dopamine and impunity.
This part of the analysis is deeply disturbing. It suggests that the violence isn't just a bureaucratic outcome. It becomes rewarding.
The source argues that, yes, for some, domination becomes rewarding. When you give a person unchecked power over another human being, total impunity, no consequences, it can create a powerful psychological feedback loop. Cruelty becomes a form of agency. It feels like power.
When you can do anything you want to a prisoner and you know no one will ever stop you or punish you.
The lack of boundaries can unleash the darkest parts of the human psyche.
Now, we have to be very careful here. This is not about some national DNA or inherent biological trait. This isn't an argument that Russians are cruel.
Absolutely not. And we must forcefully reject any essentialist argument like that. This is a human response to a specific structural environment. If you create a system of total impunity where cruelty is rewarded or at least tolerated and never punished, you will produce cruel behavior in any population on Earth. It is the system that shapes the psyche.
And this violence, this cruelty, isn't just directed outward at Ukrainians or other enemies, it's turned inward too.
That is a critical point. The source notes that the system treats its own soldiers with immense cruelty. We see it in the tradition of hazing, what they call Dedovshchina, the constant humiliation within the ranks, the shocking lack of basic supplies.
Right. A commander who treats his own men like disposable cattle is not suddenly going to start treating enemy civilians like human beings.
A system that relies on fear cannot tolerate dignity.
No, it cannot. Dignity is a threat to a mafia state. People with dignity ask questions. People with dignity have boundaries and self-respect. The system needs broken people in order to break other people. It needs to crush the individual so that the only identity left is that of a servant of the state.
And that's how it perpetuates itself.
We've looked at the present, but to understand how this system sustains itself, we have to look at how it manipulates the past. This is part 6. Historical deflection, or what the source calls the culture shield.
History in Russia, or more specifically, the version of history the state promotes, it's not about remembering, it's about justifying the present.
Let's take a concrete example from the source. The Holodomor, the great famine of the early 1930s where millions of Ukrainians were deliberately starved to death. The standard Russian state narrative today is, well, the famine happened everywhere in the Soviet Union. Everyone suffered. It wasn't just Ukraine.
That is the classic deflection, the shared suffering argument. The logic is that because peasants in the Volga region also died, it could not have been a targeted genocide against Ukrainians.
But our source argues that is just a fallacy.
It is. Shared suffering does not erase targeted policy. The fact that the Soviet state was brutal to everyone does not mean it wasn't specifically trying to crush Ukrainian national identity at the same time. Scale is not innocence. Just because you killed many different groups of people doesn't mean you didn't intend to exterminate this one specific group.
It's like the All Lives Matter defense applied to a historical genocide. Everyone suffered, so your specific suffering isn't special, and we don't have to talk about it.
That's a very good analogy. It strips the victim of their specific tragedy. It dilutes the crime until it just looks like a kind of unfortunate natural disaster that befell everyone equally.
But there's another shield the state uses, and this one is particularly effective on Western audiences. The great culture defense.
This is a mandatory segment because it is so pervasive. We see it constantly. Someone brings up the atrocities in Ukraine, the torture chambers, the missile strikes on apartment buildings, and the response is, but what about Dostoevsky? What about Tchaikovsky, the Bolshoi Ballet?
And I think many of us have felt that pull. I know I have. We admire the art, the music, the literature, and it feels almost impossible that a culture that produced War and Peace or Swan Lake could also produce this. We want to believe there's a better Russia hidden away in the books.
We have to be crystal clear on this point. Cultural heritage has no bearing on the moral legitimacy of current actions. None whatsoever.
Culture belongs to history. Power operates in the present.
Precisely. The fact that Tchaikovsky wrote beautiful music in the 19th century does not stop a missile from hitting a children's hospital today. The missile doesn't care about the music. The commander ordering the strike might even love Tchaikovsky. It doesn't change the nature of the crime.
The source calls it the Pushkin shield.
Yes. The regime uses its immense cultural prestige to create a false sense of civilizational depth. They want you to think, oh, Russia is this deep, complex, soulful nation. We can't judge them by our simple, normal standards. They use the brilliance of their dead artists to blind you to the brutality of their living police.
It masks the brutality of the torture chamber with the elegance of the ballet.
It's a form of moral camouflage. And we need to repeat this cue for our listeners because it's so important. The past explains history. It does not excuse the present. A torture chamber is a torture chamber, even if the man running it can quote poetry by heart.
And speaking of moral authority, we have to briefly touch on the role of the Russian Orthodox Church. In many countries, the church acts as a check on state power, or at least a consistent voice for peace. Even in wartime, you usually hear religious leaders calling for restraint and mercy.
In this system, the church has played a very different role. The patriarch has not called for peace. He has blessed the weapons. He has described the war as a holy metaphysical struggle.
So religion isn't a moral compass here. It's not standing apart from the state.
No. In this mafia-style structure, the church acts as an ideological service department for the state. It provides spiritual cover for political violence. It tells the young soldier that killing is not a sin, but a sacred duty. It is not a moral authority. It is an arm of the state.
This brings us to how this system engages with the rest of the world, specifically with us in the West. Part 7, the information war and the West.
We often misunderstand what Russian propaganda outlets like RT Russia Today or Sputnik are actually trying to do. We in the West tend to think they're trying to convince us that Russia is good.
Right. We watch it for 5 minutes and we think this is just ridiculous. Nobody could possibly believe this. We assume they're failing because the lies are so obvious and clumsy.
But convincing you isn't the primary goal. The real goal is to make you doubt the existence of any objective truth. They don't need you to believe their lie. They just need you to disbelieve the truth.
They want to create a post-truth environment.
A post-truth environment where you just throw your hands up and say, well, everyone is lying. Who knows what really happened? The BBC lies, CNN lies, RT lies. It's all just a swamp of propaganda.
Cynicism is the weapon.
Cynicism is the ultimate weapon. If they can make you cynical, they have won. Because a cynical person doesn't take action. A cynical person doesn't demand accountability. They just check out of the conversation.
And we see this with their favorite tactic, whataboutism.
All the time. You say, Russia bombed a school. They immediately respond, what about America and Iraq? What about Vietnam? They are actually denying they bombed the school. They're trying to neutralize your moral indignation by pointing to past Western flaws.
It's the look a squirrel strategy.
It's incredibly effective because it plays on our own guilt and our own historical baggage. But we have to remember, a crime committed by someone else in the past does not justify a crime committed by you in the present. If I commit a murder, I cannot defend myself in court by saying, well, the judge's neighbor committed a murder 10 years ago. It's irrelevant.
We have to talk about the 2014 template, the annexation of Crimea. The source argues that this was the test run for everything we're seeing now.
It was a foundational moment for the current war. The regime tested the waters, they sent in the little green men soldiers without any insignias on their uniforms, and they just flatly denied they were there. It's not us. It must be local self-defense forces who bought their uniforms at an army surplus store.
And then once the annexation was a done deal, they admitted it. They celebrated it. They even minted medals for it.
They learned a crucial lesson in 2014. They learned that international law is, for all practical purposes, a suggestion. They learned that if they lie brazenly enough and act decisively, the West will hesitate. It will be confused. The lack of a strong, decisive response in 2014 was interpreted as permission for 2022.
That is a heavy realization, that our silence was interpreted as permission.
In a mafia system, if you take a mile and nobody stops you, you come back to take 10 more. Weakness is seen as provocation.
I want to address a specific part of our audience now. The source material has a very direct warning to the West, specifically to Westerners who might travel to Russia or who admire the country from afar.
Yes, this is a direct address. We know there are many people who visit Russia and they come back and say, it felt normal, the cafes in Moscow were open, the streets were clean, the subway is beautiful.
I felt perfectly safe. The people were so nice to me.
But the source issues a stark warning. Behaving in Russia as one behaves in the European Union, speaking freely, assuming you have rights, assuming the police are there to help you, is dangerous. You are walking on ice that looks thick and solid, but you have no idea where the cracks are.
You're walking on thin ice.
You are, because once that ice breaks, if you are detained for any reason, if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, if you become a useful bargaining chip, there is no rule of law to catch you. You are suddenly subject to a system that is designed to break individuals. You are no longer a guest, you are a potential hostage.
That brings us to the final part of our deep dive today, the future. Where does this all go?
Well, the source is quite pessimistic about the idea that simple exposure to the West will fix this system. There's a long-held belief in the West that if Russians just travel more, see how we live, use the internet, they will inevitably demand change.
But that hasn't really happened, has it? I mean, Russians have been traveling and using the internet for 30 years.
Because behavior reverts when incentives remain unchanged. If you come back home to the mafia system, you have to play by the mafia rules to survive. Knowing that life is better or freer in Berlin doesn't actually help you survive your daily reality in Moscow.
So what is required for actual, meaningful change?
The source argues that any real recovery would require total accountability, truth commissions, a genuine reckoning with the past, complete institutional rebuilding from the ground up. You can't just change the leader at the top. You have to dismantle the entire machinery of fear.
And the current structure is designed to oppose that with every fiber of its being.
Because for them, accountability means the end of their power, their wealth, and their freedom.
So, as we wrap this up, we've covered a lot of ground. The illusion of the state, the mafia structure, the weaponization of language and culture.
I want to just reiterate our analytical clarification from the very beginning. This has been an analysis of patterns. This has not been a political speech.
Right, it's so important to ground this again. We aren't telling you who to vote for or what policy to support. We are trying to show you how a machine works.
Again, this is our analysis, not rhetoric, not labeling, but pattern recognition. We are looking at the inputs and the outputs of a system.
And as we close, we need to leave you with a clear final thought, a perspective to carry with you.
This is not about hostility toward a culture or a people.
It's not. It can't be.
This is about recognizing a system that relies on euphemism, intimidation, and denial.
It's about seeing the architecture of it, seeing the strings.
And recognizing it before language replaces reality completely.